5:52 p.m. Imagine standing in front of a wall covered in trophies, looking directly into a camera, and telling the world you're leaving a place that gave you the best years of your life. That's exactly what Mohamed Salah did. And yet, somehow, that farewell might not be the end of the story. Because football has a funny way of rewriting its own endings, and right now, one of the greatest players this sport has ever seen is sitting in a hotel room somewhere during the World Cup, weighing up a decision that could genuinely shock the entire football world. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand where Salah stands today, you have to understand how spectacularly everything fell apart, and then how quickly the ground shifted beneath everyone's feet. When Salah signed that contract extension at Liverpool just last April, it felt like a fairy tale moment. The king staying at his kingdom. The man who had dragged Liverpool to a Premier League title with 29 goals and 18 assists in Arne Slot's debut season, rewarded with more time, more red shirts, more Anfield nights. It was supposed to be the happy chapter. Instead, within months, the whole thing turned into one of the messiest public breakdowns English football had seen in years. It started at Elland Road in December. Liverpool were 2-0 up, then 3-2 up, and somehow let it slip to a 3-3 draw while Salah sat on the bench watching it happen in real time. Not brought on. Not even considered when the team was collapsing in front of everyone. And this wasn't a one-off. Slot had already dropped Salah for matches against West Ham, Sunderland, and Leeds after Liverpool's dreadful run of 6 defeats in 7 Premier League games. 6 defeats in 7, and the manager's solution was to leave his best player out. The man with 4 golden boots. The man who, just the season before, had almost single-handedly carried Liverpool to a title. Sat on the bench, watching. After the Leeds draw, Salah walked straight toward the cameras and said everything he was feeling out loud. He talked about a broken relationship with Slot. He talked about being made a scapegoat despite everything he had given the club. He said he felt thrown under the bus, and the words landed like a grenade. His teammates were stunned. Senior figures at the club were scrambling. There was a real moment where Liverpool almost pulled the trigger and terminated the whole thing there. And then, the management team reportedly pushed to leave him out of the Inter Milan squad entirely, and there were serious conversations about letting him leave in January. But they held back. Salah went to the Africa Cup of Nations, came back, said publicly that things were repaired between him and Slot, and for a brief moment it looked like the storm had passed. It hadn't, because you can't paper over that kind of crack with a press conference smile. Liverpool's form never recovered. Slot's second season turned into a slow collapse, finishing without a single trophy after winning the league the year before, spending heavily on world-class additions in Alexander Isak, Florian Wirtz, and Jeremy Frimpong, and still somehow scoring 23 fewer goals than the title-winning campaign. 23 fewer goals. With world-class attackers. And Salah, the man who had been their engine for 8 years, spending large chunks of the season either frozen out or a shadow of himself, finishing with just 10 goals in 34 appearances. Then came the social media post after a 4-2 hammering at Aston Villa, the moment that told you the truce was never real. Salah went online and said he wanted Liverpool to return to being the heavy metal, attacking team that made opponents nervous, the identity built under Klopp, the football he said he was built to play. And here's the part that should have set off alarm bells in the boardroom. His teammates agreed with him publicly. Dominic Solanke, Hugo Ekitike, others. His own dressing room sided with the player over the manager. By March, the goodbye was official. Liverpool and Salah agreed to cut short the contract he had only just signed, letting him walk as a free agent a year early. Think about that for a second. They signed him in April. They let him go before the contract even ran its full course. That's how completely broken things had become. And then in the final home game of the season, Anfield gave him everything. The mosaic in the stands. The guard of honor. A standing ovation that went on and on. Salah stood there soaking it in and said that it was psychologically the hardest day he had experienced in years because it was his last match at a place where he had spent the best years of his life. Not the language of a man who wanted to leave. The language of a man who felt he had no choice. And then Slot got sacked. Just like that. A manager who had won the Premier League in his first season, dismissed 12 months later after a campaign that fell apart at almost every level. And within 6 days, Liverpool had their next manager confirmed. 6 days. Andoni Iraola, the 43-year-old Spaniard who had just guided Bournemouth to 6th place in the Premier League, securing European football for the first time in the club's history, doing it with one of the smallest budgets in the division, doing it while selling his best players for close to £250 million across 2 transfer windows and still finishing just 3 points behind Liverpool. That kind of achievement doesn't go unnoticed. It's exactly why Richard Hughes, Liverpool's sporting director, who had been the one to bring Iraola to Bournemouth back in 2023, picked up the phone and went straight back to him. And here's where the story shifts completely, because one of the very first things Iraola reportedly wanted to do after landing at Anfield wasn't to sort out the transfer budget or pin down his defensive structure. It was to call Mohamed Salah, to have a conversation about whether the door really needed to be closed. And when you understand the kind of football Iraola plays, that phone call starts to make complete sense. Iraola builds teams around intensity, around relentless pressing, fast transitions, attacking aggression, the kind of football that makes supporters lean forward in their seats. The kind of football that Salah, in his own words, said Liverpool had lost and needed to find again. Heavy metal. Klopp's football. The environment where Salah became Salah. Not a controlled, compact, defensively disciplined setup, but chaos with a purpose. Waves of pressure. Players given freedom to express themselves and punish teams on the break. Under Iraola, at Bournemouth, Anthony Semenyo became one of the most dangerous forwards in the division and earned a move to Manchester City worth £64 million. Young players developed at a pace that surprised everyone. He has a track record of making attackers better, and that matters enormously when you're thinking about whether a 33-year-old Salah could still thrive in what comes next. So now you have Salah publicly saying he loves Liverpool, not wanting to leave, only leaving because the relationship with the manager had collapsed beyond repair. And then the manager who caused that collapse gets removed. And then the club brings in someone who plays the exact brand of football Salah said he wanted. And then that new manager's first call is apparently to Salah. You'd be forgiven for thinking someone was writing this. But here's what makes it genuinely complicated, because it isn't simple, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. There are real questions about whether even Iraola's system suits a player at 33 who has had a difficult season physically and emotionally. Slot's approach was demanding in its own way, but Iraola's will be even more intense, even more physically unrelenting. One journalist who covers Liverpool closely made the point that Salah's exit wasn't purely about Slot. It was also partly a club-level decision about the direction the squad was being built in, about what profile of player they wanted going forward. Even with Slot gone, that structural thinking doesn't just disappear overnight. Liverpool have already begun identifying